In the small Kansas town of Cedar Creek, the sun rose over dusty streets, casting long shadows across wooden storefronts. The townsfolk bustled about, their voices filled with gossip and laughter. Among them was Ben Cooper, a fresh-faced man who had recently taken on the role of sheriff. At just 25, he had wide eyes that reflected both determination and naivety. He wore a crisp sheriff's badge on his chest, a symbol of his commitment to law and order. Ben's youthful appearance often drew mixed reactions from the residents. While some admired his energy and enthusiasm, others whispered behind his back, questioning whether such a young man could truly keep the peace in a town filled with troublemakers. His recent decision to avoid a confrontation with a group of local thugs only fueled their doubts. As he walked through the town square, Ben greeted everyone with a friendly smile, hoping to earn their trust. "Good morning," he called out cheerfully to a group of farmers who eyed him skeptically. He could feel their judgment like heat radiating from the midday sun. Deep inside, Ben knew that earning respect would take more than just a badge. It would require courage and grit. Despite the ridicule he faced, Ben remained undeterred in his mission. His heart beat steadily as he vowed to protect Cedar Creek from any danger that might come its way. Little did he know that soon his resolve would be tested in ways he never imagined. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in Cedar Creek began to mount. Local thugs, emboldened by Ben's earlier reluctance to confront them, roamed the streets causing mischief and mayhem. They knocked over barrels at the general store, taunted the shopkeepers, and laughed raucously as they created chaos. The once peaceful town now felt more like a powder keg, ready to explode, and whispers of fear spread among the residents. At the coffee shop, old Mr. Thompson shook his head at Ben's slate-gray wanted posters hanging on the wall. "Can't believe that boy thinks he can handle these thugs," he grumbled to anyone who would listen. "A young man like him ought to know better than to try." The warmth of community had begun to chill, replaced by worry for their safety and doubt about their sheriff's ability to lead. Even as Ben continued to greet townsfolk with a smile, they barely acknowledged him, their eyes often filled with skepticism. "What will he do next?" they would murmur amongst themselves. "Run away again?" Ben felt their steresim pointed in condemnation, others laced with anxiety. Each day weighed heavier on him as he became increasingly aware that he had yet to prove himself. With tension in the air growing thicker and nerves fraying, it was clear that Cedar Creek needed someone to stand up against those who threatened its peace, and soon a true test of bravery was just around the corner. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm glow over Cedar Creek, but the atmosphere was anything but cheerful. The townsfolk gathered at the saloon, their voices filled with bitter laughter and scornful comments about Sheriff Ben Cooper. "Did you hear? The sheriff ran off like a scared rabbit," one woman exclaimed, her hands on her hips as she leaned against the doorframe. Inside, men exchanged knowing glances, their faces set in frowns. Old Mr. Thompson waved a hand dismissively. "That boy's no match for those thugs. What's he thinking? Trying to be a sheriff?" His words echoed around the room, and nods of agreement followed, deepening the sense of disappointment. As Ben walked by the saloon later that evening, he could hear them muttering behind closed doors. "What kind of lawman is afraid of a bunch of outlaws?" A knot tightened in his stomach. Though he tried to remain resolute, each cruel word felt like a weight on his shoulders. Even the children seemed to pick up on the tension. They no longer waved at him with cheer, but watched him with curious eyes that mirrored their parents' skepticism. Ben knew that every day he avoided confrontation only added fuel to their ridicule, and the doubt swirling around him felt almost suffocating. Determined not to let their disbelief consume him, Ben resolved to find a way to show Cedar Creek that he was more than just a badge. He was willing to fight for their safety and trust. The unease in Cedar Creek reached a boiling point one sunlit afternoon when the unmistakable sound of hooves thundered through the town. Dust kicked up from the main road, signaling an approaching group that sent shockwaves of fear through the townsfolk. Riding at the head was Jeb Carver, the notorious Bandit king, known far and wide for his ruthless nature and cunning tactics. His reputation preceded him like a dark storm cloud, making even the bravest men tremble. As he and his 20 hardened gang members entered Cedar Creek, whispers of panic spread through the streets. "That's Jeb Carver," someone gasped, eyes wide with disbelief. "He'll rob us blind." Heads turned, and shopkeepers hastily locked their doors, fearing what the infamous outlaw intended. The laughter from the saloon faded into silence as dread replaced it. Jeb Carver was a tall figure with piercing blue eyes and a sly grin that hinted at mischief. His black hat cast a shadow over his face, but it couldn't hide the glint of malice in his gaze. The gang behind him was equally fierce. They wore scowls that matched their menacing attitudes and sported guns polished to a shine. As they rode into town like wolves on a hunt, Ben Cooper felt his heart race. This was no ordinary challenge. This was a moment that could define him as sheriff, break him completely. The townsfolk watched with bated breath, their previous ridicule now overshadowed by sheer terror, as Carver's gang began to circulate through Cedar Creek like predators surveying their territory. As the dust settled from Jeb Carver's arrival, Ben Cooper's resolve crystallized into a firm decision. This was no longer about proving himself to the townspeople. It was about protecting Cedar Creek from impending danger. With his heart pounding, he stepped away from the throngs of fearful residents and made his way to the center of town, where he would take decisive action. Ben called for silence, raising his voice above the anxious murmurs. "Listen up, folks. We need to lock down this town." His words hung in the air, met with a mix of surprise and apprehension. Some townsfolk exchanged doubtful glances, while others began to nod in agreement, recognizing the need for a united front against Carver's gang. With determination guiding him, Ben organized a plan. He directed shopkeepers to pull down their shutters and urged families to stay indoors. "This may seem like a risk," he told them, "but it's the only way we can show Carver that we won't back down." Though he knew he stood alone in this commitment, Ben felt an unexpected strength surging within him. As he watched the townsfolk hurriedly secure their homes, Ben felt both fear and courage intertwining in his heart. He was aware that many still doubted him, yet their compliance gave him hope. In that moment, he had transformed from the uncertain sheriff they had mocked into the protector they needed. With each door that shut and window that locked, Ben solidified his role as their defender, readying himself for the showdown that loomed just ahead. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the weight of the approaching high-noon showdown pressed heavily on Ben Cooper's shoulders. He stood outside the town hall, heart racing and palms slightly sweaty, rehearsing in his mind what he would say to Jeb Carver when they faced off. Thoughts swirled around him like a storm: fear, courage, doubt, all battling for dominance. Ben glanced around at Cedar Creek, now eerily quiet. The townsfolk had retreated inside, leaving the streets deserted, save for a few stray animals and the dust kicked up by the wind. With every passing moment, his anxiety mounted. What if he failed? What if he wasn't enough to protect them? These thoughts gnawed at him as he recalled all their mocking scorn. Taking a deep breath, Ben tried to settle his racing heart. He reminded himself that he had already taken steps that required bravery. Locking down the town marked a significant turning point in his role as sheriff. Yet facing Jeb Carver was an entirely different matter. The Bandit King's ruthless reputation echoed in his ears. The man was known for leaving devastation in his wake. Ben imagined what might happen when their guns faced each other. Would he end up as another tale of failure? He clenched his fists, finding strength in his resolve despite his fear. This was a chance to redefine himself and earn the farmer's trust who had once doubted him. As noon approached and shadows grew longer, Ben steeled himself for the challenge ahead, ready to confront not just Jeb, but also the doubts that haunted him. The sun hung high in the clear blue sky, casting long shadows across Cedar Creek as the clock struck noon. The air was thick with tension, almost electric, as the townspeople peeked anxiously from behind closed doors and drawn curtains, their eyes fixed on the dusty street where Sheriff Ben Cooper stood alone. There he was, facing down Jeb Carver and his notorious gang, the moment of reckoning looming before him. Jeb was a towering figure, his black hat cast low over his brow, with a sly smirk playing on his lips. He dismounted from his horse, the creak of leather echoing in the stillness, while his men circled like vultures. They were armed to the teeth and exuded an aura of menace that made even the bravest tremble. But Ben stood firm, fists clenched at his sides, drawing strength from the resolute silence of those he aimed to protect. "Cooper," Jeb called out, his voice dripping with disdain. "You think you can stand against me? You're just a boy in over his head." Ben's heart raced, but he pushed back his fear. "I won't let you harm this town," he shouted back, the defiance ringing true in his voice. At that moment, doubt faded. He remembered why he had taken this stand. As they faced each other, the world around them seemed to blur a single moment, stretched into eternity. With a quick glance toward the sky and the sun blazing overhead as witness, Ben readied himself for what would surely become a legendary clash of wills. His courage shone through as he prepared for the fight ahead, determined to protect Cedar Creek no matter the cost. The standoff reached a fever pitch as Ben stood across from Jeb Carver, the tension palpable in the air. Jeb's gang circled like predators, their hands hovering over their weapons, ready to strike at a moment's notice. But beneath his calm exterior, Ben was calculating his next move. As Jeb continued to taunt him, Ben remembered the training he had received from the old sheriff before him, a lesson about using one's surroundings to gain an advantage. Just as Jeb began to draw his gun, Ben's instincts kicked in. He suddenly lunged to the side, aiming for a nearby cart filled with barrels. Using that split second of distraction, he pulled out his own revolver and fired a warning shot into the air. The sound echoed through the quiet street, startling horses and sending Jeb's gang members jumping back in surprise. In that moment, Ben seized the opportunity. He ducked behind the cart as bullets began to fly from the Bandit gang, returning fire with precise aim. His hidden skills came to light as he shot one of Jeb's men in the arm, causing chaos within the gang and forcing them to reconsider their attack. With each shot fired, Ben's confidence grew. He was no longer just a boy in a badge. With his heart pounding and adrenaline coursing through his veins, he outsmarted Jeb with clever maneuvers and quick thinking. Finally, as Jeb attempted to rally his men, Ben took a steady aim and fired once more, this time hitting Jeb square in the shoulder. The notorious Bandit King fell to the ground, his reign of terror coming to an abrupt end. In that decisive moment, Ben proved not only his bravery, but also that he was more than capable of protecting Cedar Creek. As the dust settled after the showdown, a profound silence enveloped Cedar Creek. The townsfolk, who had once mocked Sheriff Ben Cooper for his youth and perceived inexperience, now emerged cautiously from their homes, eyes wide with disbelief. They witnessed Jeb Carver, the notorious Bandit King, lying defeated on the ground. A sense of admiration began to ripple through the crowd as they processed what had just transpired. "Did you see that?" whispered Mrs. Thompson, her voice tinged with awe. "He stood up to Carver like a true hero." Others nodded in agreement, their expressions shifting from skepticism to respect. Men and women alike exchanged glances, filled with newfound appreciation for their sheriff, realizing that he had fought not just for himself, but for their safety and well-being. Children peeked from behind their parents, excitement bubbling within them as they caught sight of Ben's proud stance. No longer was he just the boy in a badge. He had transformed into the embodiment of courage and leadership. As he approached the townsfolk, a wave of applause broke out. Cheers erupted, echoing through Cedar Creek, resonating with joy and pride. "Ben! Ben, our sheriff!" they shouted, their voices united in celebration. Each clap and cheer washed away the doubts that had once clouded his path. Standing tall amidst the admiration, Ben felt a warmth blossom in his chest. In that moment, he realized he had earned the respect he long sought, proving that true leadership comes from bravery and a willingness to stand firm against adversity. As the celebrations began to fade and the townsfolk returned to their daily routines, Sheriff Ben Cooper stood quietly at the edge of Cedar Creek, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He looked out over the familiar streets, now echoing with laughter and relief instead of fear. In this moment, he understood that true strength does not come from physical might, but from a commitment to duty and the courage to stand firm in the face of adversity. He recalled the doubts that had once plagued him, the ridicule from those he sought to protect, the weight of their expectations, and the heavy burden of his responsibilities as sheriff. That day, under the high noon sun, he had felt fear gripping his heart, yet he found the grit within himself to act when it mattered most. It was in that pivotal moment against Jeb Carver that he discovered his own potential and resilience. Ben smiled as he watched children playing in the streets and families reunite after a long day. He realized that earning respect wasn't about silencing critics, but about proving oneself through actions and unwavering dedication. He had forged bonds with the people of Cedar Creek, not by backing down, but by standing up for what was right. With a renewed sense of purpose, Ben vowed never to let doubt overshadow his commitment again. He would lead with integrity and serve his community truthfully, knowing now that they would follow him not out of fear, but out of respect, a badge far more honorable than any worn upon his chest.